friends, I'm Lauren Bernick, and I'm flipping the script about growing older. My guests have been influencers since before that was even a thing. Welcome to the Anti-Aging Podcast. Welcome to Age Like a Badass Mother. Everyone keeps telling me that I have to interview Victoria Moran for Age Like a Badass Mother. I say, I know, I have. When Lisa Rice, my co-host from season 1, and I talked about who embodies aging like a badass mother and who our first guest should be, we both talked about it and agreed it has to be Victoria Moran. She's the OG vegan and an example of someone to whom we aspire to be in 20 years. We definitely didn't want to focus on looks because that's the narrative we've been fed for our whole lives. But when I talk to real women about what they want to hear with regards to aging, it's menopause, reinvention, and the fear of looking different than we did as our younger selves. So although I don't want our conversation around aging to focus on our looks, I'd be remiss if I pretended it wasn't a concern. And Victoria is someone who radiates beauty the way I hope we all do, from the inside out. She's absolutely stunning at 74, but that's just the beginning. She's still doing interesting things, creative things. She's written 13 books about well-being, spirituality, and vegan living. Her 14th book, Age Like a Yogi, A Heavenly Path to a Dazzling Third Act, will be published in January of 2025, but don't worry, you can pre-order it now. I'll have information in the show notes. Victoria embodies grace and supportiveness. When I said that I've already interviewed her for this podcast, I was lying because I've actually interviewed her twice. She was our first guest, but we were nervous and we didn't do a great interview, so we threw it away the way you do with your first pancake. For season 2, I asked Victoria again to be a guest, and she agreed. For some reason, her audio track didn't record. You can imagine how much my stomach hurt to tell her that our second interview was a bust. But someone who is aging like a badass mother doesn't make you feel small. They buoy you up and say something beautiful like, that wasn't meant to be our conversation, or the third time's a charm. This woman has been on Oprah twice. She has been inducted into the Vegan Hall of Fame. She could be a little bit guarded with her time, but instead she is generous and beautiful on the inside. Victoria runs Main Street Vegan Academy, training vegan coaches, educators, and entrepreneurs. She hosts the Main Street Vegan podcast, as well as a live stream on Unchained TV called the Main Street Vegan Salon. And she's working with her husband, William Melton, and Farm Sanctuary President Gene Bauer on bringing a feature film into being called Miss Liberty. It's about a cow who escapes from a slaughterhouse. Her favorite story is that she had a $1 press card from Teen Life magazine. She took it seriously and got into her first Beatles press conference at age 14. When she was 17, Paul McCartney bought her a drink. She famously said to herself, "You have to keep up with this writing thing. It makes miracles happen." So please welcome, for the third time, the wise, accomplished, vivacious, inspiring, and gracious and generous Victoria Moran. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you, Lauren. And whenever I'm feeling ordinary, I'm going to have to play back your intro. I love introductions because they take the very best things that have happened to us and encapsulate them, and all the other minutes and hours and years and decades that maybe weren't so hot kind of get swept aside, and we bring the great stuff. In fact, maybe everybody should have an introduction. Maybe we should all craft an introduction for ourselves of, this is all the best stuff I've ever done. And a good introduction is only a minute or a minute and a half, so we've all got glory.
Yes, that is such a good exercise. Everybody do that. Write yourself an introduction. Oh my God. We're on to something. So I mentioned you're 74. What is the best surprise for you at this age?
Wow, the best surprise of 74 is that it's kind of like 37. There are definite changes in the body. There's absolutely no question. And I know that sometimes people in the plant-based world really like to paint the way we eat and live as a panacea. And I know that for certain conditions, coronary heart disease, for example, it really does seem to be just that. But the fact is, this is planet Earth. Things happen, bodies break down, people get injured, people get sick. And certainly when you get to a certain age, you know that at some point in the foreseeable future, something will befall you that will exit you out of this life. And not to be morbid, but it's just the way it is. So I think that the thing that's different for me in my 70s than in any of the previous decades is you really got to seriously get busy on what you want to do with what's left of this life, because your days are numbered, as are everybody's. It's just, some people's numbers are going to be longer. Sometimes I think it would be so cool if we knew our expiration date,
Yes.
but we don't. And so we live each day as if something magical could happen. And if nothing seems to be happening from the outside, then we have to push it along and make some magic ourselves.
I love that. Yeah, I feel that too. Just being in my I just turned 56 and I feel that too. Like if I don't do these things now, or if I don't start on the projects that I want to be doing, towards the end of my life, like I'm planting the seeds now, like I have to get going. I feel that too. And I love it because I feel like probably for the first time in a long time I have time to myself where I don't have kids and other people and things like that, so kind of loving this part of my life. um
Ah,
oh
well, every time of life has its own kind of glistening parts. For
yes,
me, my 60s were my favorite decade. I
really,
mean, they were better than any of my other personal decades. I did so many amazing things. I wrote, my book, Creating a Charmed Life, came earlier. That was a big book for me. But in
yeah,
my 60s, I wrote Main Street Vegan. I founded Main Street Vegan Academy. I started Main Street Vegan Productions. We did a beautiful documentary, A Prayer for Compassion. The Main Street Vegan podcast started, and we've been going now for 12 years. And so it was just such a vital, vibrant, wonderful time. But the way life works on earth is, that you have your kind of phases and your down phases. People that are into astrology, whether you believe in it or not, they do have this beautiful way of looking at, you've always got some planets going for glory and some others that are kind of like, oh boy, this is going to be tough. And whether it's planets or whether it's just the way life works, that is the way it is. So for me, I turned 70 just as New York City was getting locked down for the pandemic. My birthday is March 21st. So my 70th birthday was right there in March of 2020.
oof,
And I remember that since I couldn't go anywhere for my birthday, since I had to cancel my lovely plan of gathering a lot of beautiful women at a lovely restaurant here in New York City. It's actually a French restaurant that's all vegan. And we were going to go there, Delise and Saracen, and just have our, vegan coq au vin and our vegan escargot. But instead, we didn't. We were all locked up. And so I did still have to walk my dog. And as I was walking out of the building garage, the garage attendant was playing salsa music. And I just stopped and there with my dog, just danced some salsa for turning 70 and went on about my business. But I didn't know that that was going to be the beginning of some really difficult times for me. My husband had been in a serious accident just a couple of weeks before that. And he had other fallout from that later over a period of years. So my life changed a lot in those ways. Main Street Vegan Academy had been in person in our apartment. And of course, it went on to Zoom for the pandemic. But because of my husband's situation, it's never going to be in my apartment again. So it is on Zoom now. And it's wonderful on Zoom. And we can have more instructors than ever and more practice time and more class hours. But it's a change. And I think that's the big deal. That humans do not like change, regardless of what age we are. And something that nobody tells you is more of it happens the older you get. So hang on. It's a wild ride, but it's the one we've got.
Is that the hardest part? Like, what's the hardest part about
Oh,
age?
God. Well, I think it's just surprise, and lots of things happen. I can only speak for myself. I don't know how other people age. I know there are outliers, and I think that outliers are very inspiring, and it's wonderful that we have them to see what is possible. But just because there are outliers doesn't mean that that exact thing is going to be possible for us. Example. Um, we've got somebody who's a genius at math. You've got an Einstein. That is possible. Am I ever going to be even proficient at math? Not to mention genius? No,
Same.
I'm not wired that
Right.
way. And if I could have been trained to change that early in life, it didn't happen. And I think it's the same with some of this, longevity and all that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, so tell us some of the things that you've done to age as well as you have. You be our guidebook. You tell us.
Well, I actually think I picked good parents, and there is something to be said for that.
Yes.
I remember on my wedding day when I was 27, my mother looked better than me. And I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel bad about it because I was used to it. My mom just, she was a beautiful woman. She knew how to comport herself, she knew how to dress, and she was just lovely. I mean, I remember when she was in the hospital for the last time in her late 80s, her hair was done, her nails were done, and that was just who she was. So I think certainly having been vegan since 1983 and having been vegetarian since 1969 is a really good plan. And I am lucky that I found that when I did. Now, I am very proud to use the V word. And a lot of people, I think, in the plant based world think, oh, well, vegan, that means you eat junk food. No, it doesn't. It means that you it means that you don't eat animal foods, and what foods you choose to eat are of your own decision. So when I went vegan back in the early 1980s, there wasn't a lot of vegan processed foods. I mean, there was some super junk food. We had Coca-Cola, we had potato chips, but certainly anybody with an interest in going vegan, certainly at that time, was not going to reach out for those kinds of foods. I mean, obviously, if you're stuck in a very small airport and it's been 18 hours and the potato chips are all that's left to eat, we'd eat them. But basically, we ate fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds. Your
Right.
basic, what I call the 5 fitness food groups. And if anybody's listening who's not familiar with this way of eating, it sounds so bland and dry and ordinary, but what you can do with those foods is stunning in
It's
terms of
miraculous.
cuisine and joy and all that. So I would say that that's the main thing. And I think the other thing is that I have always identified with my inner self that doesn't age. So from the time I was really little, I had the idea of a soul, the idea of the continuation of life, the idea that I had been somewhere before I was here. And even at whatever age you are listening to this now, think about yourself at 10 years old. It was still you. You look different, but it was you. And then think about yourself at 30, still you, look different. And now, wherever you are in your life journey, that's where you are. And 20 years from now, you'll be somewhere else. And so, if you can relate to that inner essence, this is why I've written Age Like a Yogi, because I think for people to get that concept, there is a part of you, which I happen to believe is the real and eternal part of you, and it doesn't age. And the more you can relate to that part, the more the outer is going to reflect youthfulness, vitality, health, peace, and joy.
Mm. I think you're so spot on with that. I was actually just thinking about this same thought. I don't know why. Maybe because we were going to have this conversation. Who knows? But the truth is, I was thinking about why I love doing this podcast so much. And, aside from just talking to all the wonderful people and spreading the word about aging well, is that I feel more myself than I ever have. And I feel like I've been getting to know myself all these years and know the different parts of myself. And like you mentioned math before, like I used to feel like a real dummy because I couldn't do math, but I could do other things. I could talk to people. I could, and I just feel like as we age, you're so right about we are the same person, but we know that person and we're not afraid to fully be that person. And that's what it is, I feel like, to come into yourself, to fully integrate yourself, all these little parts that you've been getting to know all these years. And that is so beautiful. So you think so, you know, y- you say you're kind of a mystic in the making, and you've alluded to a little bit here and there. What do you mean by that?
Oh, a mystic, by definition, is a person who has had an experience of the oneness of life. It's sometimes called a spiritual experience, or in Catholicism, I believe it's referred to as beatific vision. But lots of people have had this, and some of them are saints and holy people in all traditions, and other people are just ordinary folks. I think of lots of poets. Walt Whitman, a very materialistic guy. If we were living now, we would say he's, man about town, doing all these cool, hip things in New York City. And yet he had that experience. So many people did, of coming to know that they are part of all that is. And I've only had glimpses, but I've had enough of them that I know that's the way it is. Sometimes I'll be sitting around a table with a lot of my girlfriends, and they'll just be so stunningly beautiful. It's like, what? I didn't know I was gathering, former pageant queens. And it's because I was seeing their soul. Every now and then, I've been in the subway in New York City where everybody looks so different. And you've got people, some of them going through a lot of difficult things in life. And yet, every now and then, I'll see that subway car. It's like full of light. It's like each one of those people is a manifestation of the divine. And so I've always wanted to have that brush with ultimate reality. And when I was even a kid, I remember my Beatles fan club pen pal asked what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said, I want to be a mystic. And she said, well, maybe you should just be a progressive lady theologian because you could study for that in college. So I did actually get a degree in comparative religions. It didn't make me a progressive lady theologian, but it's a great for me, and I know many people have absolutely fabulous, splendid, healthy, important, empowered lives, and they live in a completely secular way. It's like, do not talk to me about any of the woo woo stuff. It's here and now. It's what you can see and touch and feel. And science tells us all we want to know. And what it hasn't told us yet, it will tell us later. End of story. Perfectly valid, perfectly fabulous way to live. And sometimes I actually envy people like that, because I know that if you believe that this is it, you're going to put all yourself into it. And I'm one of those people who believes, oh, this is just, there's a beautiful book called A Parenthesis in Eternity. The author is Joel Goldsmith, but I've always loved that title, A Parenthesis in Eternity. And that's how I see this life. I've got this long, whatever, eternity thing, and this is a parenthesis, and I want to make it sparkly and I want to make it beautiful. And yet sometimes that can lead to, oh gosh, I'm not, it's cold, it's dark. I don't really have to go to that event, when I think that if I really thought, no, this is it, I would probably have gone to the event. So, there's something good about however we see the world. And because nobody can really know the big picture, I think it's absolutely ridiculous when somebody criticizes someone for having a different one. But I find that for myself, and in terms of aging, this idea that I am a soul, I am an eternal spirit having a physical experience helps me go through it being maybe a little bit less touched by the passage of time.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds it's really wise. And I've had that experience too where maybe not in a subway, dear God, if you could see the humanity and the beautifulness of everybody in the subway. But but where I do, I'm in a crowd and I look around and I'm overcome by just my love for everyone, just knowing all the experiences that they've been through and hard things and great things and all the shared things. And I just hope that people can do that a little more now because we're so feels a little divided, a little, and and that I hope that we can do that a little more, just see each other as these souls. um if you could go back in time, is there anything you would do differently?
Oh, good heavens. Probably lots and lots. But on the other hand, anything that I did differently would change the positive outcomes too.
Hmm.
So, I could certainly look at the past and say, "Oh gosh, wish I hadn't done that." And yet that put me on a path that led me to something else. So I don't think that's a place for me to meddle.
That's exactly. One of the things that I've learned from doing this podcast and talking to so many really um, inspiring people is that advocating for oneself is like a big topic that keeps coming up time and time again. And I would just love for you to tell the story about when you were naming your seminal book, Main Street Vegan. I love this story so much. Talk about advocating for oneself. Can you tell us that story?
Well, I got some help from the universe on that one. I really believe that this is the time when the ideas of living more gently and compassionately on the world, which includes a vegan diet and lifestyle, this is the time, and it's getting some help. And so when you're really trying to advocate for that, I believe that you sometimes get some help that you would never expect. So I was working on a book that I wanted to be called Main Street Vegan, but when it got a publisher, and it got a good publisher, Penguin Random House, and I spoke to my editor for the first time, and she said, "Oh, we're so happy to have you. We're so happy to have this book, but we hate Main Street. You're going to have to change that." So they had bought the book from a proposal, which is what you do with nonfiction. And I was writing and willing to change the title because when you have a publisher, they buy it. So it's theirs. And if they want a different title, you give it a different title. But I couldn't come up with one. So I had one of these, I call them vegan miracles. My husband and I were walking up Broadway, and there we saw somebody so famous that you could recognize him from the back. And that was Michael Moore, the filmmaker.
Mhm.
Now, I know some people love him, some people despise him. Doesn't matter which, because in this context, we're not talking politics, we're talking vegan miracles. So he had enjoyed a book that I had written, a weight loss book called Fit from Within, and he had reviewed it in Oprah's magazine. So I thought, well, let me just give my card to this woman that's with him and say hello. I wasn't going to stand there and be a groupie. There were a lot of people around him. And she handed him the card, and then I hear my name being called. And he and this woman, who turns out to be his sister, are following us up Broadway, and he's saying, "Victoria." And after we exchange pleasantries, he says, "We need to talk. We need to talk about food." So we sit down at the bus stop, and I'm talking to Michael Moore about food. And my husband's talking to his sister about something else. I don't know what. And at the end of this short conversation, Michael Moore says, I'm going away for a month, and when I come back, I'll call you. And I thought, of course you will. Academy Award winners call me so often, it is getting to be a nuisance. But lo and behold, a month later, he called. So we did start talking about food. And on one of these food calls, I mentioned that the book that I was writing was supposed to be called Main Street Vegan. Publisher didn't like that. He said, let me talk to them.
Wow.
So we had a three-way call, and it happened that my editor was a fan. So he convinced her, she convinced the higher ups. And as soon as I knew that Main Street Vegan was the name of the book, I started getting all of these ideas bubbling up. There ought to be a Main Street Vegan podcast. There ought to be a Main Street Vegan production company. There ought to be Main Street Vegan Academy, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches. And all this was just popping, and it all came into being in a very short period of time.
Yeah. Usually when something's meant to be like that, it just flows and it just comes to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert? I think that was the name of the
No,
book.
did not. How
Yeah.
was it?
Oh, it's such a good book. It's just like how, well, you've written 14 books, so you might be able to attest to this. Just she talks about like it's almost like when the thing is right, it's like downloaded to you. You know, not that it's effortless, but some things are a struggle and some things are like you're just typing and listening and taking the notes, right?
Yeah, I've
When it,
totally had that experience,
yeah.
especially with so many books and the ones that just did okay and the ones that did really well. And I knew before they were ever published which were which.
Right. And did you find that the ones that did really well were the ones that were just came to you, right? They were
Yeah, they're the ones that there's a phrase, this actually comes from the musical Ragtime. Wonderful, wonderful musical. And I think there was a book prior to that. And they described a family as being touched with an extra light. And
Mhm.
I think that these experiences, these creative projects, these little meetings that we have are sometimes touched with an extra light.
Mm.
And I don't think we should poo-poo that kind of thing. I think we should really pay attention to it because regardless of your worldview, there does seem to be the reality that the universe speaks to us. And certainly the quantum physics people would support that contention. So when something just seems like, oh, yeah, this is it, I think we're supposed to follow that.
I agree completely. And yeah, that's how you sort of know when you're on your right path, right? Things just line
Exactly.
up for you, like with Michael Moore. And you're like, oh my gosh, all these coincidences, but they're not really coincidences. They're the things that are meant to be. And
And the other thing that's interesting, and I can say this, from the having lived a while perspective, is that sometimes you'll plant a seed and you're not going to see the result of that for a really long time. So, for example, we're doing a Main Street Vegan Academy cohort on Zoom right now. It's our 35th. And at the beginning, when everybody introduces themselves, they always say how they heard about the Academy. And one woman said, Michael Moore talked about it on CNN. That was
what?
in 2012, unless he's
Wow.
done it since. I think that was in 2012. And here we are, 2024. And this woman, the time came to be right in her life for getting this certification, but she held on to that information for 12 years. So if ever you're out there trying to accomplish something, or maybe you're just trying to get people around you to have more respect for or interest in the way you eat, the way you live, and maybe they're teasing you or maybe they're criticizing or whatever, but just know that that seed is planted and you don't know what's going to happen later. So
Hmm.
I think we
That's
just have to have this
incredible.
expectant attitude
Yes.
that there could be some good in whatever we're seeing.
Oh, I
It
love that.
might not look good now. What do they say? It's not over till it's over.
That's right.
And if it's not solved yet, it means it's not over.
Oh, man. You're giving some good advice today. See, we were supposed to do this 3 times. Um, so, one of your books, and you mentioned it, Creating a Charmed Life, Sensible Spiritual Secrets Every Woman Should Know. What's something from that book that we should know?
Ah, well, it's a blessed book. Somebody wrote that to me. She said, "I love all your books, but that Creating a Charmed Life, that's a blessed book." And it really is. And I hope people will want to read it. It's an oldie but goodie. There was a sequel called Living a Charmed Life, but that's not the one you want. You want Creating a Charmed
Okay,
Life. It has
creating.
a beach umbrella on the cover. So I think, well, there's a lot in there. It's 75 little essays, but the one that I think I get the most response from is a concept that I had called play your free square. And I take that from the game of bingo. And if you've ever played bingo, you know that when you get your bingo card, in the middle, there's a free square. You get to put your little button there. You didn't have to do anything to earn it. You didn't have to know anybody. You didn't have to be extra smart. You didn't have to be sitting in the front row. If you've got a bingo card, you get a free square. If you've got a life on earth, you've got a free square. So, what your free square is in life is something that just comes incredibly easy to you so that you could even overlook it. And when we think about free squares, a lot of people want to look at their gifts and talents, and that's good too. I mean, certainly it's great to recognize if you have, for example, mathematical ability, which you and I both said we don't have, but somebody else does. So that's all great. The free square is a little bit more subtle. It's not so much as what you do for a living as what makes your life. So for me, my free square is running into people. So we talked about the Michael Moore incident. I mean, that morning, my husband and I had gone to a movie. And then for maybe the second time in our 30 years together, I went to another movie with him. We went to 2 movies in a row. We finished one, we came out, we said, "Oh, that movie's starting. We want to see that too. Let's go back through the ticket line. We'll see that movie." So we weren't even supposed to be walking up Broadway at the
Right.
time that we did. We saw a second movie. And so these things are interesting to me. But my free square is meeting people. So you talked about the Beatle thing. I am a nerdy, overweight, acne plagued girl from Kansas City, but I got into that Beatles press conference when I was 14, when all of the pretty cool girls were across the street behind a rope,
Yep.
because meeting people is my thing.
Yep.
And sometimes it's just the right person at the right time. It's not always famous people, but it's that connection gene.
Yeah.
So that's mine. So what's yours?
Yeah, I actually think I have the same one as you. I
Okay.
really do, and a lot of times when I meditate, I actually will hold the thought, Please bring the people to me that I am supposed to know." And it does. It happens for me all the time, and I'm aware of it, that I meet the people that I'm supposed to know.
Mhm. It's lovely, and there are
Crazy.
others. Let's give some other examples
Yeah,
so people get more of an
that's
idea of
true.
what this is. So I was talking with someone the other day, and I knew she had crafted her own career, but just looking at, like, a bio, I didn't quite understand it, and I said, "So, exactly what is it that you do?" She said, "I find money for people."
Huh.
I thought,
That's a
what a
good
lovely
one.
thing to be able to say and make everybody love you. Like, oh, find some for me. So she finds money for people. And that's just a kind of, how many people feel that they could do that? So many people have the idea that money doesn't like them, and that finding it for anybody would be very difficult. But in her case, it's like, oh no, money and I are friends. Or I can, like with children, for example, some people we've heard of dog whisperers. That's a free square for some people, but there's also the child whisperer. It's somebody who can understand these new, fresh little beings that are just trying out life on earth for the first time, or
Mhm.
after many times,
Right.
depending on your belief system, but they're new and fresh this time. And that scares some people. Some people just, I don't know how to talk to that small being.
Right.
But you can. So, and if you don't know what your free square is, if you don't know what this special kind of magical, it's almost like a, a card, that a password or
A
something that gets you
superpower.
in where other people can't go. Yes, ask those around you,
Yeah,
and they've seen it,
they'll
and they'll
tell
tell you.
you.
Because sometimes
My
we'll say, "Oh, that. Oh, that's nothing. Oh, that.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
that. That's your
Yeah, that
thing.
is
That's
something.
gonna take you places." Yeah.
Mhm.
And, like,
Yeah.
for
Go ahead.
me, my gift and talent is words. It's the only one I have. I can write and I can speak, and I can't really do anything else. But shoring that up is this thing about meeting people. So, yeah, look at your free square and have some fun with it.
That's another great thing of advice. So let's talk about yoga because I want to get to your book. And I think you've been doing yoga for what, 56 years? Is that right?
And I think that's about right,
Is
yeah.
it well, what has it done for you? How has it made a difference in your life?
Well, first, I need to be really clear what I mean when we say do yoga. And I would more say study yoga, or I have been a student of yoga. Because in the Western world at this time, when we say yoga, we think of somebody standing on their head or doing a downward facing dog, or since the vinyasa flow thing is so big now, doing a whole sort of series of exercises, which when I got into yoga would have been the furthest thing from yoga. Yoga was about a posture that you hold, hatha yoga,
Yes.
physical. But the physical part of yoga is a tiny, tiny little part of this yogic lifestyle. So in Age Like a Yogi, there aren't pictures of doing postures. There's only really one chapter out of 40 specifically about postures, because yoga is a way of life that is striving for union, it's striving for connection. All your parts, all beings, and you and the divine. And so, as you embark on a life like this, you're looking for balance, you're looking for calm, you're looking to still the fluctuations of the mind. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he says that's the definition of yoga. Yoga is to still the fluctuations of the mind. Now, that's very surprising to people who think that it's to go on Instagram and do some really impressive physical contortion. So it's kind of
Yeah.
been misunderstood, and it all can be embraced. It can all be part of it. But when I think about aging like a yogi, it's what we talked about earlier. It's knowing that we have this inner core that doesn't age. And then it's practicing yoga's spiritual, mental, and physical disciplines. And then I also bring in yoga's sister science of Ayurveda, which translates as science of life or sometimes science of long life, which is all about physical health and vitality. Wonderful tips, wonderful adjunct to a whole foods plant based diet to really help you customize your self care and look and feel the best you can for as long as you can.
Yeah. I have heard you speak about Ayurveda often, and it's fascinating to me because can you talk a little bit about the dosha types and where we could take
Mhm.
the quiz and kind of your routine a little bit?
Sure. Well, the doshas in Ayurveda, as they relate to physical people, are the three body types: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And everybody has all three of these energies, but some people have a lot of one or quite a bit of a couple, not much of the third one. A few people have almost equal amounts. They're called tridoshic. And what's important when you learn about your dosha is you're not trying to balance them out. You're not trying to have 33 and a third percent of each one. What you're trying to do is be perfectly yourself. Your doshic makeup was determined at the moment of conception, and exactly the way it was is perfect. So I know that if this is new to you, you don't yet know what these mean, but let's just say that you are 75% vata and you are 10% pitta and you are 15% kapha. So that's absolutely perfect. So to be out of balance would mean your vata gets up around 80 or 85. But then your neighbor, their natural dosha makeup was their 85% vata and their 10% pitta and they're only 5% kapha. And so for them, being 85% vata is not out of balance. It's just right. So, what is really cool about this, before I even explain what these doshas are, is you are perfect. And for all these years, I think women have been told it's easing up now. It's not as bad as it was, but it was always you ought to be thinner, have more muscle, look like your sister. What all these things we were told. But
Yeah.
Ayurveda has been saying for 4 to 5,000 years, no, you're just perfect. Your job is to stay in your own doshic makeup and not let anything get out of hand. So, what's a dosha? It's an energy. So, vata is very light and playful, creative, very mobile. Vata people tend to be thin, they tend to be the kind of dancer type. So a pure vata would be an Audrey Hepburn, Fred Astaire, Cicely Tyson, that kind of look. Then pitta is grounded, muscular, great executive ability, very good at rationality, figuring things out. They build muscle easily. On the downside, they can be very aggressive. They can get angry easily. They can get inflammatory kinds of conditions. And so, pittas that we might know about are some of the wonderful athletes like Serena Williams, um, these kinds of people that are strong and making things happen on earth. And kapha is just the sweetest people. Now, Deepak Chopra has actually said that in the Western world, in the US, we have a shortage of kapha energy.
Oh.
And I think he's right about that because when I'm working with people and they do these dosha quizzes and find out their doshas, almost everybody is predominantly pitta or vata.
Mm-hmm.
Kapha people tend to be a little bit rounder, a little bit not so thin, like to maintain a thin body back 20 years ago when we were still thinking everybody had to be thin. For a kapha to do that, they would have to be on a diet all the time, which was why they just couldn't do it. So they're going to have a little bit of a bigger body size. They're very generous. They're very slow moving. They enjoy the seated pastimes. But because it's a slow moving dosha, they're very slow to get sick. So, other than kind of respiratory conditions or maybe some obesity related complications, if they do sit too much, they're going to be healthy for the longest time. So, Deepak Chopra himself is a kapha body type. Oprah is a kapha body type, and we've seen her gain and lose a lot of weight. But her general um, type, as observed by Ayurvedic doctors, would be kapha. So you find out what your delineation is, ideally by seeing an Ayurvedic practitioner, because they give you a very detailed test and then they take your pulses, but not just like we take the pulses in the West where, oh yeah, your pulse is, 68 beats a minute. No, not like that. they take three different pulses, got your kapha, your vata, and your pitta, to figure it out. They look at your eyes, they look at your tongue, they look at your nails. It's a little bit of the same kind of diagnostics that you might have experienced had you gone to a traditional Chinese medical doctor. But the other way that you can find out your dosha is to take a quiz. And there are a couple online that I like. One is Deepak Chopra's, and all you have to do is Google Chopra dosha quiz and you'll find it. And there's also an online store called banyanbotanicals.com. And they have a really good dosha quiz. And again, it's a store, but you don't have to buy anything to do the dosha quiz. And, don't do both of them and compare. Don't make yourself crazy. And when you're answering these questions, just do the first answer that comes to your mind, because we try to overthink things. And an interesting thing with aging and these doshas is that regardless of your particular makeup, as you get older, you're going to tend vata. So you'll still be yourself. Maybe you'll be pitta or kapha dominant, and that will not change. But vata is going to try to elevate. So some of the vata characteristics, these can be natural when we're over 55 or 60, or you can develop them earlier if you've let vata get uh, out of balance with too much travel, too many late nights, too many cold foods, iced beverages, things that are upsetting to vata, which is a little bit delicate. You'll find yourself with digestive variability, is commonly used to describe vata. So when we talk about irritable bowel syndrome, which is obviously an actual Western pathology, it's intermittent constipation and diarrhea. So that really describes like a veritable digestion, although vata tends more toward constipation, but cramping, just the ability, I used to be able to eat that. Now I can't eat that anymore. You'll find that losing the collagen and looking thinner, being able to see the bones and the veins in your hand, all these things in vata. And if you can keep vata pacified, it doesn't mean that you'll never get old. It doesn't mean that, you'll be 90 years old and somebody will mistake you for your grandchild. We're not talking about that. But we're talking about that the negative aspects that we relate to growing older can be lessened and can slow down.
How do you do that? How do
Well,
you keep vata pacified?
well, you take good care of your vata. And that's really such an important part of my book, Age Like a Yogi, because
Mm.
nobody has ever really looked at Ayurveda and said, oh, guys, for this whole thing about aging, if you can manage vata, you can manage aging. You're not going to prevent it, but you're going to manage it.
Mm.
So, the ways to take care of vata dosha, if it's prominent in you, or if you're noticing some of these out of balance vata things happening in your postmenopausal years, then vata is pacified by comfort. So, just think for a minute, what makes me feel just as comfortable as can be? So, the first thing that comes to mind for me is being in bed or on the couch, all wrapped up in covers.
Same.
Just now, you can't spend your life that way, but whenever you need it, to just give yourself that warmth and that embrace, that's just going to bring all of that kind of sympathetic nervous system stuff, which is also very vata, just down to a manageable level. So, warm baths, lovely music, being with people you absolutely adore, warm and hot beverages. So I love something like a golden milk,
Mm.
almond milk with turmeric, or a ginger tea. Ginger is a specific for vata. And there are certain foods that vata really like. So ginger being one, blanched almonds are nice, sweet potatoes, also soups, anything that's just kind of like warm, grounding, porridge, uh, that kind of
Right.
thing. So it's basically rejuvenation through comfort. And so as you get on in years, especially postmenopausal, and you know you're getting more into the vata stuff, really pay attention to your body and what it wants. Because so often, and I see very often in the health world, there's this idea of forcing your body to do what somebody says you ought to be doing. But if it doesn't feel right for your body, then maybe you shouldn't ought to be doing it anymore. So in yoga, for example, in the physical aspects of yoga, maybe you've always done some kind of power yoga. Maybe you've always done hot yoga and it was great and you loved it. But then maybe you get to a point where it's just not feeling good anymore. And so our first response is likely to be, oh, I'm so lazy. Oh, what's wrong with me? I used to do this. Why don't I love it anymore? I'm going to force myself to go there and love it. And then maybe you force yourself so much that you get injured. So it's really important to pay attention to where your body is right now and give it what it needs right now. I don't know if people listening had these experiences in childhood, but I'll bet you did, of finding something from earlier childhood that you really loved and thinking it's going to make you really happy because it did. But then when you find it later, it doesn't. So I remember finding my pacifier from when I was a baby, when I was like 4 years old, and thinking, oh, wow, this would be really good. I stick the thing in my mouth and it's like, what? What did I ever get out of this? This is just a nasty piece of rubber. And later, I think it was sixth grade, I was a school crossing guard. And I can remember the pride of having this orange sash that I wore
Yep.
and this little pin on it. And I, lost it. And then maybe, I don't know, ninth grade or something, I found it again and I put it on thinking it would give me that wonderful sense of confidence and self-esteem that it had once given me. And it's like, you're wearing a thing for a sixth grader. And it's like that as we get older. Some of these things that were like, oh my gosh, I'm so good at that. I love that. Like my first yoga teacher who's 99, she does chair yoga now. And I remember when she first told me that, I was maybe, I don't know, 68 or something. I remember thinking, well, I'll never do that. I will always be able to get down on the floor. Well, as of today, that's true. I still get down on the floor. But I'm open to the fact that at some point in the future, chair yoga may be more appropriate. And I need to look at that as, look at me. I am continuing with my yoga and I will continue with it for my entire life, but I don't have to like impress somebody on Instagram with it.
Yes. I was having that experience at yoga the other day because did injure myself, and everybody was doing full wheel, which is like a full back bend. And I've always done that. And I was like, I'm just going to do bridge. I could force myself up into full wheel, but why? Because I'm going to injure myself more. It's not good for my wrist right now. That was an ego driven thing, and I felt pretty good about just being in bridge. I was like, this is good. You're doing the right thing for your body. And there was part of me that was looking around going, I should be in full wheel. But I really did feel good about it. I was like, I think you're maturing. I think you're doing the right thing for yourself. You're finally growing up. So oh man. Well, I I have already pre-ordered Age Like a Yogi, and I'll have
Oh,
all the
thank you.
information, of course. And anyone who pre-orders it is going to receive the companion Age Like a Yogi e-cookbook and be invited to attend an exclusive Age Like a Yogi Zoom summit on January 12th. And you'll record it for people who can't attend. So I'll put all that in the show notes.
Yes,
Um,
people do need to send you can buy the book anywhere, but you need to send your receipt to assist@victoriamoran.com because otherwise we won't know you pre-ordered and we can't send you
yes.
the perks.
Okay. Assist at victoriamoran.com. Receipt. I'm making a note so I can put it in the show
Ah,
notes. Okay.
thank you.
Of course. All right. I just want to ask you a couple quick little questions that I ask everybody. Well, you've already given the best advice for aging well. I won't ask you that. Do you have a best piece of advice? Doesn't have to be age related that you've ever received.
Oh, I have been so lucky to be around so many really brilliant people, but I'm going to give you one that I actually borrowed for the book that we talked about, Creating a Charmed Life. Lovely, lovely woman back in Kansas City, Crystal, that I worked with. And she said, you have to find places to recognize yourself. And that has been so valuable to me because we so often think we're supposed to be on somebody else's timeline, on somebody else's vision, and we need to be able to adapt. And certainly to a degree, all that is true. But where we're really able to go, ah, is in those places where we recognize ourselves. So this could be physical places like maybe out in the woods or in a cafe or whatever floats your boat. It can also be mental places. Like, do you really feel like you're recognizing yourself when you meditate? Do you really feel that you're recognizing yourself when you go to a movie in a theater and those lights go down and you're just going to be wrapped up in this incredible story? So any of these things where you recognize yourself and can be without any extra energy yourself, that gives you just so much depth to go out in the world where you sometimes have to be on somebody else's schedule.
Oh, that's good. Um, you're coming up with some good nuggets today. We probably really were destined to have this third conversation, I think. What I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What's your favorite concert you've ever been to?
Well, it had to be that very first Beatles conference. Well, actually, Beatles concert in Kansas City. I had been to a Beatles concert in Denver a couple of weeks prior. This was 1964. This was the first year that the Beatles toured the States. They were not supposed to come to Kansas City, but it was added on at the end by a rather colorful character called Charlie Finley, who owned the Kansas City baseball team at that time. He ultimately moved them to Oakland, where they were the Oakland A's. But he was kind of a character and he wanted people to love him. And he knew that if he could get the Beatles to Kansas City, a lot of people would love him. So he
You're
paid
still
them what
talking about him.
yes, at what at that time was an extraordinary amount of money. Now it seems like a pittance. And so I was there and it was cool. But I do want to tell you the follow up on that just to close. Years later, I mean, 35 years later, 40 years later, I don't know, long time after that, I was watching TV and just kind of scrolling through the big channels. And I noticed on one of the sports channels, they were doing a retrospective about the life of this man, Charlie Finley. And one of the baseball players who had worked with him said, Mr. Finley just had this ability that he could look you up and down and see your soul. And if he liked what he saw, he would go to bat for you. And that was so meaningful for me because that day of the Beatles press conference, which was in the afternoon, the concert was in the evening, I was in the hotel lobby. I had all my documents. I had a letter from the editor of Teen Life magazine. I had an invitation to the press conference. I had my press card, but the police officer had been told no teenagers on the elevators. So I was trying to make phone calls and do what I could do to get where I knew I was supposed to be. And in comes Mr. Finley with a Playboy bunny on his arm. And I explained to him that I was supposed to be there. Here's my letter. Here's my card. And he did just what that man said. He looked me up and down. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, okay. just don't say anything. Well, I wouldn't have said
Wow.
anything anyway because I was speechless by the time I saw all four beetles 6 feet away from me.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
bunny on one arm, teenager on the other, up we go, and the rest is history. But we're writing these incredible biographies, all of us. And if you're thinking, well, I don't know, my biography doesn't seem all that amazing, just just say yes. Say yes to the possibilities. Say yes to life. And when you know that something is meant for you, like I knew I was supposed to be in that press conference, just don't take no for an answer. And I believe, at least, that you'll get some guidance, you'll get some help, and you'll find yourself wherever you are meant to be.
Oh man. That's exactly right. And that's your superpower, like you were talking about, meeting people. You just tied it back to that because look what you did. Oh man. We're gonna end on that because you brought it today after
Oh.
3 times. Thank you,
Bless you, Lauren.
Victoria.
Thank you for doing such a lively and positive podcast on this topic,
Thank
because
you.
it's not all about surgery and worrying. It's about living and doing amazing things for other people, other beings, and the planet.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Victoria. And you keep on shining your light too. I don't have to tell you. I know you already are. So thank you so much. You take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening, friend. From my heart to yours, be well until we meet again.